All right, we're going to start part 7 of rebuilding the Giesler boat. I've got the bottom finished with a coat of varnish on it, and it needs to be sanded down a little bit and then put another coat on it. But before I do that, I want to make the strakes that go on the bottom, the trim for the trim pieces, before I can flip it back over to the other side. Just to kind of show you a little bit of what's going on. There's where the old holes were, and there's where the old bolts were. I'm going to move it out to here so I don't hit those old plugs. I'm going to drill each one of these out. Make a new strake on each one. Before I put it on, I'm going to sand the bottom so that it'll take a coat of polyurethane, and then put them on. The finish it's hard. We're going to see how it goes. But before I start, I want to just clean this place up. It's a disaster. Doing that resin is a mess. So I'll get cleaned up. I'll cut my two pieces of trim and get ready to put them on, and we'll get them on. Everything. I got some air bubbles on these corners. Wherever there was 90s, a little air stayed in there, but we'll see what we can do with that. I'll sand the transom up. I went around this edge here with the mesh, and it left me a little line there, and I still have some tape on there. We'll see how that's going to turn out. Here's the stem that I put in. Got some air bubbles wherever that old keel. I should have sealed it, but got a little air behind it on some of the rough spots, so I'm going to hit it with some sandpaper. But the new piece sealed up pretty good. And now where I took the paper off, and I chiseled the glass, there's some roughness there, so I'm going to sand that down and trying to taper it up. I didn't want to seal this seam here because the wood's not the best, and I didn't want water to get up in there and just set. So maybe next year I'll have to change that piece, but we've got enough work to keep us busy. I'm trying to get used to a new camera here, and it's not working out so well. I have it set up where the picture's taken too low. And I apologize for that, but we're going to go ahead anyway. I cut my 2 trim boards to size and laid them out. And marked all the holes so that I could pre-drill them and cut the point off and then cut the back end off. I'm going to leave it hanging over a little bit so I can trim it off later. I just set it on my workbench and drilled all the holes out, sanded it down, and set it up to fit on there. There's through bolts that go in afterwards, and I went up underneath and drilled those through bolts through. I got the angle on the end with a gauge and hand sawed the point off of it. One thing I think would have been better is if I had these all made and set up to go on, these on between the last 2 coats of polyester. I think I'd have got a better seal, and it would have worked better. I think it would have been easier. But either way, it worked out fine. took my drill where the old holes were and just pre-drilled them. Then I went up underneath and drilled up through. It would have been better just to drill straight down from the top. If I could have lined them up, it just coming up through the bottom, they weren't straight and they kind of went on a little bit of an angle. But I got everything mounted the trim pieces. Then I drilled for the T-bolts. Then 2 bolts went through the seats to give it extra strength. And bolted those all together. And it gave me a nice tight fit. I put some caulk on it before I put them down. Trimmed the end off. Then I coated them with a polyester resin and then put the varnish, another coat of varnish on everything. I did do a bead of caulk around them, but I think that was a waste. If I'd have had a little bit more bottom caulk, the caulk to put to seal it down, I think it would have been better, but nonetheless, everything worked out all right. If the caulk comes loose that I put on around it, I'll have to just take it off and varnish it. Other than that, it all went well, and moved on to the next project of putting the spray trim on. There was 2 long carriage bolts that tied the seats in with this trim piece and also with the strakes that went on the underside of the boat. Then there was 4 T-nuts that just went through the 2 strakes. I usually started them first and then I hammered the T-nut in, then I tightened them down. That way the threads, you knew the threads were started. So I just put those 4 T-nuts and the 2 carriage bolts in. Then I trimmed the excess that hung over the transom off flush with the transom. And that finished these 2 pieces up. Next, I moved on to the 2 pieces of spray trim that were bad in the back, and I just did the same thing as I did on the other pieces. I cut them up, I fitted them, I got the screws all in, then I took them off and put some caulk on the bottom, spread it out, and I put those on. I think initially these were probably steamed and bent nicely around the hull, but I didn't steam them, so they weren't a 100% tight fit, but they fit good enough. I had them all ready to go on and just pushed them on and put the screws in just where they were before. Put 2 screws at the transom, and I think it had 3 screws. The 2 pieces were the splices were the original splices, so I didn't have to splice, make a new splice where the old one went. The old trim piece does have some rot, and it should be changed, but I don't have the ability to steam it, so I'm just going to change these 2 small pieces. And trim them off at the back end, just like I did the other pieces.
I'm halfway.
Put some caulk on it, seal them in there, and that fixed it up. All right, I'm on my last coat of Spar varnish, and looks pretty good. I'm not a couple things I'm not happy about, but overall it looks pretty good. The varnish went on good. It's a pretty hard surface, and overall it looks like it took pretty well. I think it really stuck good to the wood. One of the problems I had is when I did this caulk line here, it's really hard. I have no problem with that. When I did this one here, I went too fast, and I think that's going to come off. So I'm going to leave it on there. If it starts coming off, I'm just going to take it off and fix it. Everything else came out pretty good. I'm going to do 1 coat of Spar varnish, and what I'll do is I'll sand it with the oscillating sander. And one thing about when you're oscillating sanding, you don't slow down, you keep it moving, otherwise you're going to end up with, it gets hot and makes a rubberized mark. So I'll sand it with the oscillating sander, then I'll sand it by hand with one of those foam sanders. And everything came out fairly decent. There's the transom. I oscillated sanded and I hand sanded. You can do this as many times as you want. I think I did 3 coats on top of the polyester resin. Here I'm using the soft sponge 3M sander, which seemed to really work well. Just get it all scuffed up so that it'll take another coat of varnish, and if you want to put a 4th coat on, a 5th coat on, I don't know how many you need, but on top of the polyester you already have a thick coat, so I did 3 coats I think, and that did it. Wiped it off with a denatured alcohol and then put a coat on top.
Got it.
All right, just put it on the box right there, hon. Last step I had to do was put on the metal strip for the bow protector. It was rusty, so I just took a flap disc and ground it down, got all the rust off, gave it a coat of Rust-Oleum. And I mounted it to the bow. This finished up the bottom, and I'm ready to flip it over. I just drilled my holes and put my screws in and mounted this bow protector on. And I finished up the bottom of the boat. I'm ready to flip it over and finish up on the inside. So thanks for watching. And if you enjoy the series, don't forget to subscribe and get your notifications to watch the next video. And I'll see you then.